Hi, I'm Josh, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I reread in 2020. I love rereading books. Honestly, before I started my booktube channel and really got into reading in the last couple of years, at least 50-50. What I read was stuff I already read in the past, because when I found something I liked to obsess over it. But now I'm at a place in my life where I like to read more books. I feel comfortable enough to branch out, and so I do. But it's important to me to make sure that I make room for rereading books that I love, or books that I feel like I have more to gain from. I've mentioned before in the past how booktube, my routine here, is somewhat antithetical to my wanting to reread books, because my motivations here are to read as many new books as possible, and it isn't because I feel like you're expecting me to do that or that I have to stand out. Trust me, I don't think I'm going to stand out no matter what I do. I want to read more books just because focusing on books like this really hones in on the fact that there are so many books to read and only so much time to do it. I'm 30 years old. I'll be lucky if I live to be 90, so we're like a third of the way through my entire life, and there are so many books in the world and I haven't read them. Then there's wanting to reread books. It's like, Josh, what about these other books you've never even tried, never even touched? How do you know you want to reread these when you haven't tested the waters over here? But I think there's a fine balance to walk. And to quote Carl Sagan, paraphrase Carl Sagan, because I don't remember the quote, I could read a book a week for the rest of my life, and I still would only read a fraction of the books in the largest libraries in the world. The trick is knowing which books to read. With that in mind, is the perfect reason not only to talk about these books that clearly mean something to me, to read them more than once, but also just the fact that think about all the reasons why they mean something to me, because that isn't the same. It isn't just because I love a book that I'll read a book. There are a lot of reasons, and let's talk about those. Starting with, I think a great example of a book that I didn't reread just because I thought, oh, this was a fantastic, easy experience, and that is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I reread this in February, literally right after I read it, and it helps that it's super small, so I could fit in the audiobook in my schedule of my reading plans. And I'm glad I did, because reading anything in general, the audiobook, it can be hard to retain details, especially when it's sort of a literary work that's intending to be somewhat cerebral in what it's trying to say. And it's not always straightforward in trying to figure out what it is trying to be said. And because of that, it sometimes hinders my experience reading a book. I think a lot of that is not necessarily always a book's fault. It's often my own fault just for how I read. Nevertheless, it hinders the book for me. And there are times where I feel like I can recognize how there might be more there, even though the first go around it wasn't really there for me as much as I wanted it to be. And this is a perfect example of that. I think I went from like a 3.5 to a 4.5 book. And part of that is just having the context of the broader details, and then being able to focus in on the smaller details that I may have missed the first go around. And it really heightened the experience. And I think it's great because this is one of those books that there's such a powerful message to be had here. And I guess I'll talk about what these books are about. This book is about a young black girl who is essentially feeling very self-conscious about the fact that she's very dark-skinned. And she has this fantasy about being light-skinned or having blue eyes, because blue eyes are like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. It's like just this societal idea of perfection. And she's obsessed with this. And it is not an easy read, and it's a very hard read, both mentally and also emotionally. And on that note, I mean, I've now read, I think, 2 Toni Morrison, and that was the only one I reread. Before I read another Toni Morrison, I actually want to reread the book that I already read, which was Beloved. The basic idea is I'm probably going to reread every book of hers before I move on to the next. I think it's one of those books. She's one of those authors who every book she writes is probably going to be really dense, and it's going to take more than one read through, given how I read. There are multiple ways to read a book. Like, you could sit down and study a book for hours, and that might be a more effective way of reading it the first go around. But that's not how I read, so this is like a way around that. This works for me. That's why I like doing it. Next, I reread Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and I reread this really because I thought it was going to be a good book club pick, because I had a book club going for a while there, and then it sort of fell apart. This one was fine. Like, I really liked the concept. Like, the writing is fantastic, and the world building in the sense that she has here is really effective, but the actual plotting is somewhat bare. This is a futuristic world where a flu basically knocks out a huge majority of the population, and we read this largely because of the fact that it was a pandemic, and to sort of analyze it in that aspect. And I think it actually worked really well. It's sort of an interesting contrast to what's going on and how people act. Obviously, One thing this book misses is the fact that people are going to pretend like it's not a problem as they walk around and slowly get themselves killed. Besides that, the actual world, the sort of post-apocalyptic narrative is, or I guess the dystopian narrative rather, is very effective, and it makes it overall an enjoyable read. I ended up giving this 4 stars, I think, both times around, but I still feel like there's something about Emily St. John Mandel where she focuses more on the sort of interconnectedness and complexity of how all her characters tie into the plot than she does the plot itself. And while I think there is an argument to be had about why that makes for a compelling story, because I do love good characters, I still want a bit more of a narrative, a bit more of a plot there to work with. And this one I don't think is hurt too much by it, just because of the fact that it has this backdrop of this really compelling setting. Her newest book, I feel like, is the same problem, but the backdrop, the setting, wasn't enough to make it as compelling. Next was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and this is just a pure enjoyment. I think it's great for the season. I've read it now like 3 or 4 times, and I'm getting around. I do it every winter now. It's just fun. It's the embodiment of a lot of what I love. It is horror-esque or gothic-esque. It's time travel, and I guess that's about it. Those 2 things are things that I really like. Obviously a happy ending, but still, it's something that I really enjoy reading, and it kind of stands out when it comes to classics in the sense that I have a problem in general when I read Victorian literature, and this one I don't have a problem with. So I'm curious to see if it's Charles Dickens' writing style that just happens to work for me, or if it was just the fact that it was just a novella with a lot of what I already love as far as like the genre goes. Next was another enjoyment reread, which was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I reread this with a friend. They did not end up liking it as much as I did, but I loved this. I think I give it 4.5 or 5 stars. This narrative of this man who's a scientist and a professor, and he has a wife and a son, and then something happens, he gets kidnapped. Next thing you know, he ends up awake in this alternate universe where things seem the same but slightly different, and it's trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Where's his family? What is the situation? I love this because I've talked about plenty on this channel. I love quantum mechanics. I love the many worlds perspective, and this is an embodiment of that. It takes that concept and it runs with it, and I love it for that. It's such an exciting ride. It is a thriller, sci-fi mashup, very effective for that reason. Next was another reread that was partially for enjoyment, partially for trying to understand the book better, and that is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I read this first in 2018, and then I reread it this year, hoping that one, I was more mature of a reader, I suppose, as far as how I read, but also in the fact that I really struggled with this the first go around, because I think part of it was that the way the characters tie together is actually kind of nuanced, and the fact that we shift between different perspectives. Like literally, we have third-person perspective, we have second-person perspectives, and that shifting, I don't think I ever recognized what was going on, and it threw me off, especially as someone who was trying to listen to the audiobook. Oddly enough, I listened to this faster than I did the first time, because when I first read this 2018, I hadn't tried listening like past 1.2 speed. I think that illustrates that I think part of it just things I'm going over my head, and I need to be more familiar with the story, and also just be aware that this is a story that's going to require me to make sure that I am paying close attention, because there are different types of stories out there that I think require different levels of cognitive focus. There was a while there where I just assumed I couldn't read those kind of books via audio, and I'd have to go without them. And now I realize that's not the case for a number of reasons, and this is the perfect example of that, because I love this. This I can go around 5 stars, from 3 to 5 stars. One of the best sci-fis of the year. Another case exactly like that is going to be Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. I read this first, I want to say maybe 2016, 2015, right after I read Kindred for the first time. I was so excited because I loved Kindred, and then I read this, and it was a kind of a disappointment because it was very slow. The pacing of this book is just very different. Things aren't moving as quickly, and so it takes a bit more patience. And it is something that I think, again, that I have matured with. Things I am more capable of appreciating is this sort of slow pacing. Partially for that reason, I ended up loving it the second time as well. Like The Fifth Season, I gave it 5 stars. This is another post-apocalyptic, or rather dystopian world. I think one where climate change is basically taking effect. And I want to say it's actually set in 2015. I could be wrong about that. And this was one of her last books, Octavia Butler's last books. And it follows this one woman who basically recognizes what's happening, and she feels the need to take an initiative to sort of try and save as many people as possible, and as well as save herself, basically survive in this new world, all while trying to explore this sort of new religion she's playing with, this idea that God is change. Whatever you touch, you change. Whatever touches you, changes you. And I read this right on the time that I was going through a very atheistic phase. I wasn't sure how I liked it or not, but later on now, like reading it now, where I'm further along and more comfortable with my beliefs, which I'm still very much atheist, I appreciate a lot more because it is true. Like, if you want to have an embodiment of God that is change, that's absolutely true. Change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. We change things and things change us. And this is the perfect reason why I want to read, really, because reading is information that I expose myself to. It basically invites me to be changed, which is why I think it's important to think about what it is that you're reading and the influence that it's having on you, because whether it's just for fun or not, whatever you're reading is going to be influencing you in a number of ways. It all continues to shape how you see the world, how your mind works. I guess I particularly like this idea. I'm going really off on a tangent here, because as someone who doesn't believe in free will, I do believe in the aspect that because we do have at least a abstract control over what we expose ourselves to, even if that itself might be predetermined in some ways, what we expose ourselves to will then define the directions we go. And if you really want to improve yourself, you need to take a hard look at the things you're consuming, because that really will have a huge influence on the way in which you approach anything in general, not just what you're reading, but life in general. But that's one of the reasons why I love this book, just because I love that concept, the concept she's exploring here. Like, T.V. Butler always has some sort of deeper level to what it is she's writing about, and this one was great. Okay, next, I'm going to talk about another reread. I reread Middle Game by Shauna McGuire, and then I reread Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. I reread this twice. I don't know if I said, but I reread 19 books total this year, and this was 2 of them. I read this first in October of 2019. I really liked it. I think I had really high expectations the first time, so I was like a little critical in some areas, and then upon reread, I ended up loving it even more than the first time, and it's even more so the second time that I reread it. The second time I reread it, I actually read it in conjunction with the new book, Over the Woodward Wall, which I loved that experience. It was just so much fun tying the two together and seeing how the two overlap. But this is a sci-fi fantasy story. It's 2 twins who are made through alchemical processes. And traditionally speaking, alchemy is this idea of being able to convert or change elements into other elements. This takes the idea and adds on to it. It's this world where alchemy is real, and they're able to use it to make people and be able to use it to harness the energy of the universe. And we focus on these 2 twins who are basically the embodiment of math and language. These 2 things considered to be the sort of embodiment of like the power of the universe. And this has the wit and the beautiful writing of Shauna McGuire, mixed with just a fascinating world that is just so much fun. I didn't know that also a time travel mechanic in here. It's a real mindfuck, and I love it. I think it's so executed so well, especially the way in which the sort of time travel aspect of it is worked into the story. It's just so finely detailed, and I love it. I love it. I love it so much. Now we're getting on to like the full series that I reread. First, I read The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kroll, then reread The Faded Sky and Pointless Moon. I reread all of these in July. I read this one originally in, I think, April, and I read this one also in July, right before I did my reread of the entire series. I've talked about it already before, but when I reread this one, it was because I had listened to the audiobook being recorded via YouTube streams, and while I really liked that experience, I did realize upon reread that there were a lot of details that went over my head because of all the interruptions that were involved there. But overall, I loved reading this the first time and then rereading it again. I'm really glad I reread it. And reading them next to each other really solidified the fact that this is my favorite. Like, I love all these books. They're all 5 stars, but this is absolutely the favorite. And I'm glad because it's the newest book. You always want the newest book to be the best. And so The Calculating Stars, or the Lady Astronaut series, is this world, this historical fiction type world where an alternate history occurs, where an impactor hits into Washington. It destroys Washington, and so Congress has to be remade. But more importantly, the impact knocks debris into the atmosphere. This debris shifts the climate, and it basically triggers a speeding up of climate change to the point where everything we're already worried about climate change is happening in order of decades instead of centuries. It basically means they have to get to space. And the first 2 books, they focus on Elma, this one scientist and physicist who is urging us to go to space, and particularly trying to make it a more inclusive venture, one to first have women and then to have people of color. The series works extremely well because the storytelling is just really effective, and it's so well thought out, the science and the way things are playing out, and then the fact that how well she's able to be inclusive with her characters and deal with the problem of race and discrimination as well as with gender, and in a way that really highlights how these problems, while in a historical fiction context, they still very much fit into the broader problems of today, as it's been made very apparent in the last few years. Now, this book is the first time we venture away from Elma to a new character, which is one of her friends, someone else who is a pilot. And this one switches to another pilot who is also the wife of the governor. This focuses on her job as one of the people on the moon. At this point, we have a base on the moon. We're trying to move forward with that. Now, I should make it clear, that may sound like a spoiler, but this entire series is a prequel series to The Lady Astronauts of Mars, where we have a woman who is on Mars. What I'm telling you now, I don't take that as much of a spoiler, considering the entire series is all leading up to a certain conclusion. The story is much less about the broader details of how we get there and the obstacles we have to face and how we might be able to face those and what it takes to face it. Overall, I think this series is a fundamentally optimistic look when it comes to space travel, and how with the right motivation we could come together and we could have a successful mission or branching out into space in a way that is both effective and inclusive. I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I reread the entire 4 novellas of the Murderbot Diaries before I read her newest book, and this is essentially following Murderbot. Which one is it? This is this one. Murderbot, who is a robot who's able to break their governor module, basically the thing that controls what they are and are not allowed to do. So now they're not really having to listen to anyone. There is no authority over this robot except for themselves. While you might think that, oh God, it's coming to a robot gone mad situation, it's not at all like that. It is instead about a robot who is very much like us, but someone who doesn't quite fit in. They do not really understand humans, so they just want to stay away from them and just sort of consume entertainment through various forms of media, just keep themselves entertained. And that's where the story starts off, and then it just branches out. And I think it is an amazing series. Overall, it's a 5-star series. There might be one in here that got like 4.5 stars, but it's a really fun series. It is technically like deep space, like we're talking about really spacey stuff, but I like it because it's not like a space opera where things are just super complex. In that sense, some people might not like this because the world building is light, but I think it makes it for a much more fun ride when you don't have to obsess over a bunch of details to appreciate the story of what's going on here. Finally, and we saved the worst for last, and I do mean that, I reread this book here that I'll show you in a second. It's a book I've read plenty of times before, and it's just one of those books that I like to reread. It's one of those series I like to just reread. If I'm not in the mood to do anything significant, I'll put this audiobook on or these audiobooks on just to sort of pass the time, because it's sort of something I can listen to without having to obsess too much over it. And the one I finished this time was the 3rd book in the series, and now I'm on to book 4. And then, I don't want to talk too much about that. Finally, we have the first 3, I think, of the Chronicles of Narnia. I do not count this as one, I count this as 3 books because I had read the first 3 in the series. I thought I read the first 4, but then when I read the whole series in December, I realized I hadn't. This series was mediocre at best. I did not like it that much, honestly. I regret rereading it. I don't think it was worth my time. When I realized that, I was already so far into the series that I figured I might as well go all the way. At least it's pretty, eh? So those are all the books, all 19 books that I reread this year. 19 as a number isn't that bad. I mean, I read like 200, so we're talking about maybe 10%, is that right? Yeah, 10% of what I read, which is actually a fairly decent number, broadly speaking, and more than one a month, which again, I'm happy with. So let me know, do you like to reread books? How much of what you read actually is composed of rereads versus new reads? And how do you think about that? Is it something you think about at all? Or is it just something you naturally do out of curiosity? I have a tendency to overthink things, so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the only one who stresses about this, because I always find a reason to stress. But that is everything. So thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, why don't you give me a stack of books emoji in the comments. And as always, hope you all have a great day and stay safe. Goodbye.